Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. In the previous video, we started a Git repository by creating a project. Now in this new video, we're going to look at how to create a remote repository on GitHub. We'll also look at how to set up a personal access token that would allow us to connect to that remote repository. So we're going to look at some few configurations in our local repository by looking at the Git config and then the Git remote. Once that is done, that will give us the opportunity to push our work from our local repository onto our remote repository. So we'll be looking at the Git Push command. Once we have been able to push to our remote repository, we'll now have the access to use the Git Clone to pull our work from the remote repository to any other local repository that we want. So let's get right in and look at how we can do this. Okay, in our previous video, we ended off by creating this repository called wp_git. So first of all, I'm going to git bash. I'm going to open my terminal, the bash. To do that, I'll right click inside of this directory and then I'll see git bash here, open git bash here. I'm going to click on that one. Now we can do this because Git actually installs in a way that it adds up to our Windows path and allows us to access it from our drop downs in our Windows. So when we right click on any directory, we'll actually have the option to click on git bash. So that's what I just did here. Okay, so I'm going to continue from where we left off in the last video. I'm going to use my ls. Okay, so my project is right here. So I'm gonna cd into my project. Okay, so once here you can see that it is showing master, which means that this is a Git repository. So I'm gonna ls and then I'm gonna use the cat to see what is inside. So this is what we created in the last video. This is my first repository. Okay, so from here we're going to look at how we can create our repository on GitHub. But first I want to go over some few things from the previous video. Now over here you can see that we created this file called readme.md. Now .md is an extension for Markdown. Now what is Markdown? Markdown is a form of formatting language that allows you to represent or display text in a particular way. It's sort of like markup languages, and a very prime example of a markup language is hypertext markup language, which is HTML. So HTML uses tags to format text in a way that it appears in certain ways on our screen for us to see. That is the same way that Markdown works. Markdown uses its own form of tags in quotes to allow us to display words in a particular way. Now there's a whole canon on how text should be displayed in a readme and even how to display comment messages using special ways of putting things together. But I'm not really going to go so much into that, but I just want to teach you a little bit about the Markdown so that you can actually be able to format your words in a very more clean way on GitHub. When we get to GitHub, you will really begin to understand some of these things. Now this Markdown has a couple of commands that you can use. I'm not going to spend so much time into them. When we get to actually working on our readme, I'm going to show you some few things you can use to make your readmes look a little bit more nice on GitHub. But with that out of the way, let's just look at how we can go to GitHub. Okay, so let's jump right here to GitHub. Okay, so once here on GitHub, you can use the sign up to sign up. If you haven't signed up, if you don't have a GitHub account, you can always sign up for a GitHub account. But I already have a GitHub account, so I'm just gonna sign into my GitHub account. Okay, so I'm gonna type in my credentials. Okay, it's right there. I'm gonna sign in. Alright, so once you sign into GitHub, if this is your first time, you should see something like this. I'm gonna save this. You should see or have something like this. Okay. So we're just gonna look at how to create a repository and also how to use a personal access token. Okay, so we're not gonna spend so much time here. If you look here, it's all, you can always come back and look at some of these things. But we're gonna create a repository. So on your page, just look for where you can create a new repository. You can start one here. Okay, so now we're going to mirror the repository we created on our local machine. So we're going to call it the same name that we called our local repository. Remember, we created this repository right here. So we're going to use this same repository name in our remote repository. Remember, in machine control systems, the project exists both locally and remotely. So that project name is going to be on both the local and the remote. So we're going to create this right here. We're going to leave it on the public. We're not going to add a readme. Now, I told you earlier on in the other video that readmes are important because they allow you to add vital information to a project. It will tell you about what the project is about and the technologies that went to create that project. So you can actually add a readme inside of GitHub, but we're not going to do that. We have a readme already set up in our local. So we'll be sending the readme from our local onto GitHub. So we're going to leave this right here. We're going to create a repository. Okay, so once we've been able to do that, a couple of things here. It says get started with GitHub Copilot. Then we also look at invite collaborators. Now this place is where you are able to actually add other people to the repository. So let's say you're working in a group, you have a group project that you have to do. You can actually invite a collaborator to share or work on this same repository with you. I'm not going to spend time here, but I just want to show you how you can do that. So you can actually invite somebody else. Okay, you can invite someone to actually have access to this project. You can come here and you click on add, and then you add the name or the username of the person you want to add. Okay, so I'm going to leave this one and then we'll take a look at this place. So if you're going to create or set up the repository so that it can be shared with the local repository, you need to do a couple of things. So you can see that GitHub tells us what we can do. It says we can create a new repository on the command line that is from our local repository. You can do that by doing the git init. We've already done that already. You can do the git add, the readme. I think we did that in the previous video. Then we can do the git commit, then the git branch. Now this particular command right here allows you to change the name of the branch. So currently in our local repository, the name of our branch is master, but we can always change it to main or to any other one. Then after that we can set up the remote, and then we can push. We're going to go over all these commands very shortly, so don't worry about that. Okay, so now that we have this, let us return back onto our page. Okay, I'm gonna do a couple of things. Okay, so now that we are back here, we're gonna do our Git configurations and our Git remote. We're gonna do some setup to allow us to actually link this local repository that we have here to our remote. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna do the git config command. Now the git config command allows us to do configurations for our local system. Now there are three types of configurations that we can use. We have local configurations, we have global configurations, and then we have system configurations. We're going to look at only the global and then the local configurations. Now If we want to set a global user for our configuration for our local repository, then we can use the git config. Then we're going to use the global flag this way. Okay, now the global flag allows us to set a user globally for our Git repositories. So on this system, if I set a global flag or I set a global user, this user will have access to every single repository that will be initialized on my local machine. So this is a global user. Now we can set local users as well. The local users apply to individual repositories. So we can have a global user that can apply to every single repository on this machine. Then we can also have a local user that is specific to a particular repository. Now, if we check this one right now, user.name, you realize that there's already a user that I've set up. Now, this user was set up a while back when I was creating my first Git. When I was installing Git for the first time, I created this user to use a particular repository. So I already have a global user on the system. Now I can always change this by using the git config -- global user.name, and then I'm going to set a new name. So let's say I wanted to set a new name like John Doe. Okay, so you make sure that your name is inside of the quotations. I can do this, and then this will immediately set a new user for my global configurations. I can do the same thing for my email, and I'm going to set it as johndoe@gmail.com. Now what I've done is that I've changed the global configuration. So if I go to git config -- global user.name, it's gonna give me John Doe. Okay, so it's showing John Doe here. So this is how we actually set our global username and our email. Okay, so now I've already set the two. Now it's important that you actually use the email and then the username that you have created from your GitHub account, because usually this user and email is going to link to a remote later on. So it's not really advisable to use random email and username. It's always good to use your GitHub username and email. Now when you go to GitHub, you will see that the username over here is jbeard. If I should check over, you can see that that is my profile. My profile is J. So that's the username I'm using on GitHub. So it's always best to use this username instead of using any other username that you prefer. Okay, so that is for global configurations. Now we can do the same git config for a local level. Now I've set John Doe as my global username, but if I don't set any local user for my current repository, which is wb_git, this Git system will automatically pick the first one, which is the global user, which is John Doe, and use that as my username and my email if I'm supposed to send over to my remote. But we don't want that. We want to use my actual GitHub username and email global instead of using a global username. I'm going to use a local username to actually configure this local repository. So online and in many tutorials, you realize that people only use the -- global to set it, which is fine. You can do that, but I want to use the local configurations to set up the user for this particular wb_git remote repository and local repository, so that in case I wanted to create another repository, I can still use a new local username, or I can decide to just use the global. So I'm gonna just set up a local username for my local repository. So we do that by using the git config user.name. So instead of adding a global flag, we just leave it at git config user.name. Now this will allow us to actually set up a local user. So I'm going to set up my local user by using my GitHub username this way. Okay, I'm going to do the same for my email. It's going to be 87. Oh my god, I cannot spell Gmail. Okay, so now when we check our local user, we'll see jailbreak. If we check our global user, we'll see John Doe. So we can actually have multiple users on the same Git configuration. So now I have my Jaybird and I have John Doe. I can always change them at any time. So that is for the Git configuration. The next thing we're going to look at is Git Remote. Now Git Remote is important because it allows us to set the remote URL for which our local repository is going to be linked to, so that we can push to it. If you don't set up your remote, you will not be able to push to that remote repository because Git would not know where to push to. So the Git Remote allows you to set up where the local repository is supposed to be pushed to. So now we can check whether there is already a remote there. We can do git remote -v. Okay, so when we do git remote -v, if there is a remote, it will give us the list of the remotes. Now remember, your local repository can be linked to multiple remotes, so you can have more than one remote linked to a particular local repository. So once we've done this and nothing is showing, it means that there is no remote that has been added or configured for this particular repository. So we're going to add one. So we're going to do a git remote add. So we're going to specify where the remote is, which is usually called origin. That is the name of the remote. Usually in GitHub, your remote is called origin. So git remote add origin, and then we're going to add a URL. Okay, we're going to add a URL, but we're going to get that URL from GitHub. So let's head over back to GitHub. Okay, when we initialized our repository, it gave us a URL. So this is actually the URL of your repository. That is the remote repository. So we're going to copy this URL. We're just going to click on this one to copy it, and then we're going to go back into our system, and then we're going to paste this URL here. Okay, now this URL that is going to be pasted here is going to set the git remote URL, so that when we push, Git knows where to send our files. So we're going to enter this. Okay, and then our remote is set. So now that this is done, let's go back and add some few things and refresh what we did in the previous video. We're going to go over some few commands so that we don't forget. So we're going to do a git status, just because I can do it. Okay, and then I'm going to add some few things to my readme so that I can be able to save some changes and add them to my new configuration, and then so that I can commit them, and then we'll be able to push it from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my VI. I told you can use the VI or Echo, or you can even open your file in any editor of your choice and then add the information you want. I'm going to use my VI. So I'm going to use VI readme.md. Okay, so this opens up my VI. This is my first repository. Now, I spoke about Markdown earlier on. Now, Markdown allows us to format our text in a particular way. So say I wanted to add a very nice heading to my readme so that my readme looks a lot more cleaner. First of all, I'm gonna just use something like hash. Something like hash. So in Markdown language, when you have something like hash, this is the same as using something like h1. Okay, if you are familiar with hypertext language, you see this represents a header text. So in Markdown, we'll use something like hash, and then we'll type what we want to type. So let's say readme. I just want to put readme file. Okay, so this is going to be our header. So I'm just teaching you a little bit of the Markdown. So by using this hash over here, you're actually specifying that this should be a bold header. So we'll see that very soon when we push it to GitHub. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one more information here. Say I just learned Markdown, and in Markdown we can put something like this, a double star, and that would actually represent italics. So if I put my words in double star like this, it means that I've put them in italics. So I can leave this one down here, and I'm gonna just type in this tutorial I have learned let's say I want to use a couple of formatting text for an unordered list. So I'm going to do something like this. I have learned git add git status git commit git config git remote git push. Okay, so I can leave something like this down here, and then I'm gonna save my work. I'm gonna go to escape :X like I taught in the previous video. Okay, so now I have this work done. I'm gonna go to git status. Let's see what's going on here. Good. So this file has been modified clearly, so it's red. Now what we're gonna do is we're going to add this file. So git add readme. Now if you watch this carefully, you saw that I didn't type everything out. I just typed red and then I put a star here. Now this is a wildcard that you can use to actually autocomplete the tree. So let's say you have a couple of files that are too long for you to type. There are a lot of files that are long, so you can use the star to connote everything else after a couple of unique identifiers. What I mean by this is, let's say let me bring back my folder here. Okay, I'm gonna go over here so that we can see what I'm doing. Let's say I create a couple of files called my name is a big fat lie. Okay, so .txt. So imagine I created something like this, as it's already showing here. Now we have a file like this which is so large, and then you want to be able to type everything out, because you don't want to, when we are using Git and we are using Linux, you have to actually specify the full name of what you are trying to use. So we cannot just type everything out. So if you want to just use the star, like I want to git add this, just going to do git add, and then I'm going to do my name. But because my name is unique and there aren't many files like that here, I can simply add the star at the end, and then it's gonna pick everything that I'm trying to add without me having to type out my name is a big fat lie. So this is just a little bit of a tip, a trick you can use to actually autocomplete your statements in a Linux environment. You can also do this for when you are changing directories. You can change directories, and then you can, if you don't want to type the full name of the directory, you can just type a unique part of that directory and then continue with a star, and then it will automatically pick up. With time you see how these things are done. I'll do a little bit of them for you to see it. So that should do with that one. If I go to my Git status, I'm gonna see that I've actually committed or added two things to my staging area, which is my modified readme and then the new file I created. But I don't need to use the new file, so I want to remove that new file. So Git is saying that I can either use a git restore, and then I'm going to use the --stage flag to remove that file or to unstage it, or I can use git add or git commit to commit them. Now I want to only commit my readme. I don't want this other file here, so I'm just going to use the git restore to unstage it. So I'm going to do this git restore --staged, and then the name of the file, it is my name. Like I said, I don't have time to type everything, so I'm gonna just do this. Okay, so when I go back to Git status, it's gonna show me that this particular file is not added to my staging area. So what do I want to do to it? I actually just want to remove it. So git remove. I'm not gonna use a git remove. I'm just gonna use a simple remove my name. Okay. So Git status again. Okay, so I'm now down to my readme, so I'm gonna do a git commit. Please don't get confused. Even though we've been doing a lot of going around, we still have not committed this readme file. All we did was add it to the staging area, and it showed that it has been modified. So it's left from red to green, which means that it's being tracked now. So we now have to add a commit. Now in my previous video, I spoke of the way to commit a message, and I spoke about how you have to use a very descriptive language for your commit messages because it was important for tracking. Now in the previous video I just did git commit this way, which opened up my VI editor, my Vim editor. Now we can do commit messages this way, or we can use a shortcut. Now remember, every git commit requires a message. If you don't add a message to your git commit, Git will not actually commit that file. So I don't want to use this particular method to do my git commit. So I'm going to actually quit. Okay. Now when I quit, it's gonna say aborting commit due to empty commit message. So Git actually will abort a commit if the commit message is empty. So that's that for you. So I'm gonna do my git commit again, but I'm gonna use the shortcut called -m. Now this -m is the same as opening an editor and then typing your message into it, but this is a lot more shorter and it's faster. So I'm gonna do git commit -m, and then I'm gonna open a quote and I'm gonna type the message I want to add. So my message is that I updated my readme file with Markdown tags. Okay, so this is descriptive enough. Now that should save or commit my repository or commit the latest changes I've made. So I'm gonna do a git push. So over here in my GitHub, you realize that it said once you've done your Git init, which we've already done. We added our readme, which we've done, and then we came over here to commit our first message. We committed, so we've done the commit. Then you can do branch to change this from whatever branch name that you have to main, but we don't want to do that. I'll teach you how to do that soon, but for now it doesn't matter. And then you have to do a configuration by setting your remote. So we did that by setting our Git Remote at origin, and then we did this. Okay, all right. And now the next thing we have to do is to use Git Push. Okay, so that is all that is left. So we're gonna just pick something like this. Let's just copy this, and then we're gonna come here, and then we're gonna paste it right here like this. Paste. But since we are not using main, we are still using master and not main. Okay, we are not using master, we are not using main, we are using master. So we have to make sure that we represent it exactly as we have made it. If our branch was called main, then we would have used main, but since it's master, we're going to keep it as master. So we're going to do this, and then we're going to hit enter. We're certainly going to get an error over here. I have a feeling. Certainly gonna get an error. Okay, so now watch this error very carefully. Okay, let me do an ls just to. Okay, now Git is saying that there is a remote permission error here. So permission to this denied to Coder. Now what's happening here is this. There is a global user called Coder, which we have not changed, but we actually created a local user called jbrood, and now we are trying to access jbrood. Okay, we're trying to access our remote repository that we have created here. We're trying to access this particular URL, okay, from our local end, and unfortunately it's saying that unable to access this particular repository because there is a permission error here. Now when you look at this 403 here, it's basically trying to tell us that you don't have authorization to access this particular repository. Now why is that? Now first of all, let me back up a bit. Prior to I think 2021, Git actually allowed you to authenticate right inside of Git Bash. So naturally, if I had done this before 2020, what this was going to do is that Git was going to pop up a particular page for me to log in my credentials, and then it would just quickly log me into GitHub and then send my files over. So it was using something like a basic password authentication to allow users to authenticate right inside of their Git Bash. But GitHub has now stopped doing that. It's deprecated. We can no longer just use basic password authentication in our system. So there are two ways we can authenticate ourselves over GitHub. Now, the first way is to use a personal access token, and then we can also use an SSH key. Now when we look over here on our GitHub, we can see that there is HTTPS and then there's SSH. Now these are two ways that we can actually access our GitHub repository. So I think that for this video, I'm going to teach us how to use the personal access tokens, because you can use both actually. You can use either the PATs or you can use the SSH key. The SSH key are also very fun, but in this very particular tutorial, just focus on how to use and create the personal access token. Without this, we cannot be able to send our file over to GitHub. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to head over to, if you're following, we're going to head over to settings. Okay, and then in settings over here on the left side at the bottom, you can see something like developer settings. We are still in settings, so we come down to developer settings right here. First of all, we're going to click here and we're going to go to settings, and then once in settings, we're going to click on developer settings. Okay, alright, so once we are in developer settings, we're going to go over here to personal access token. We're going to click on fine grained tokens. We're going to click on this one, fine grained tokens, and then we're going to click on generate new token. So I'm going to do that. Okay, now I'm going to specify the name of my token. I'm going to call it Web3 token. Alright, so that'll be the name of my token. Now you can set the expiration date for that token. Now this is important because for companies that are working on features, you will not be allowed to set very large expiration dates. This is because the shorter the expiration date, the more you have to recreate your token, which is a lot more safer. I mean, you don't want someone creeping on and taking in your the token that you have set forever. So we're gonna have to set this to a number of days, so that after those days we can recreate the token. But I mean, I'm not working on anything. I'm not working on a Google feature that is gonna cost me billions of dollars should someone compromise my account. So I'm gonna set this to whatever I want. For our purposes, I'm just gonna leave it on 90 days, 90 good days. And then the next thing is we're gonna give access. Okay, now this is the reason why we could not even actually push our work from the local repository in the first place, because we don't have access. So this repository access, we're going to set it to all repositories, whether it's local or public. Now basically what we're doing is we are creating a super user token so that we can use this token to do anything at all on our repository and on our account. So we're going to give access to all repositories. We're going to come down here, and then permissions for the repository, we're going to give it every single permission there is. So we're going to quickly run through this, set everything to read write. Okay, let's quickly do this. The reason why I'm giving access to everything here is because I want to make this particular token a super user. I don't want to restrict any kind of permission from this token. So I'm going to set everything here to read and write where accessible and where possible. Okay. This can be some work, so take your time to make sure that everything is checked before you move on. So read and write, and then you have to do account permissions as well. So I'm going to set the account permissions. It has every account permission there is. So I'm going to set this to read and write, GPGs, just that thing. Okay, now there's one thing you need to learn about this particular token. You need to save your token. Don't throw away the token, because if you lose the token, you have to create one. Make sure that when you create this token, you save it properly. So once I'm done with all of this, I'm going to come here and generate my token. Okay, so once this is done, the token is right here. So I'm going to save this one. I'm going to click this. Okay, I'm going to open a notepad and put it here. Make sure that you don't lose this token. This token, your access to your repository, so don't lose this token. So now that this is done, I'm going to leave here, and then I'm going to come here. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to edit our Git Remote a little bit. Now when we do Git Remote -v, we can see that there is actually a remote that we have set. So right back here, you can see that it's actually fetching and it's actually pushing to this particular URL over here. Okay, but the only problem is that it does not have the permissions to actually push to this repository. So what we're going to do is we're going to edit our remote a little bit to add our personal access token so that it will be able to authenticate over this token and give us access to our GitHub repository. So we're going to type our remote again. So we're going to do Git Remote. But first, we have to actually take off the old one before we can add a new one. So we have to do a Git Remote. We're going to do remove origin. Okay. So once we do this, we go back and check Git Remote -v. You realize that the remote is no longer present. So we're going to add a new remote. So we're going to do Git Remote add origin. Sorry. And then we're going to put the URL, which is right here. Where are you? Okay. Okay, so we're going to pick this URL again. We're going to put it back here. Okay. But now, instead of just entering this as it is, we're going to have to put an @ sign here, and then over here we're going to copy our access token. Okay, so you see you have to actually save this particular file because you need this access to access your account. So we're going to put this right here. So you make sure that your work looks exactly like this. So you put your personal access token right after your /, and then right after the personal access token you add an @ sign right here before the actual URL to the repository. So once we've done this, we're going to hit on enter. So with that done, now we have a new remote. We check Git Remote -v. You see that this is actually the remote it is sending to. So now that that is done, we can now go over and try to push our work. I don't want you to forget, because this is so important. You need to actually keep track of what we are doing, because you can easily get lost. So what we've done so far is that we've actually made some changes to our readme. Okay, and then this readme that we've done, we made changes to it. You can look at it here. Cat. Sorry, readme. Let me just do this. Okay, so these are the changes we've made to our readme, and then we have committed these messages. We can do this by looking at git log. And when we look at git log, we'll see that there has been a change that was committed, and was done by jbrood, and it was done today. Okay, you can incidentally see that the first commit was actually done by Tofcoder because we had not actually set our local configuration or our local user. This is actually the global user that was used at the time. Okay, see all the commits that have been done. You can see at the commit there are unique identifiers here that can be used to actually do some more detailed work on this particular commit and this particular repository. Okay, so we've done this, we've made some changes to our readme, and now we've committed those changes. So the next thing we want to do is that we want to push this readme from our local repository onto our newly created remote repository, so that we can have a working copy of this readme both on my local system and inside of my GitHub. Now currently my GitHub doesn't have any file in there, but once I push my readme to my GitHub, I should have the readme both present in my local and in my remote. So we're gonna do the Git Push -u origin master, just like I said the last time. Now this -u here means an upstream. Okay, and we are doing this so that Git will remember that we once pushed to a particular branch called master on our remote, so that it doesn't have to keep asking us what is the name of the remote you are sending to. Okay, so this is very important. Make sure you do it when we are pushing from our local to our remote for the first time. for the first time, we're going to use the -u flag. So we're going to do this. We're going to go enter. All right, nice. So clearly we can see that this has actually been pushed to our remote repository. Over here we can see writing objects 100%. Everything has been pushed over to our remote. Now how will we be able to check this? Let's run over to GitHub and refresh our GitHub page. Nice. So when we go to GitHub, we can see clearly that there is a readme file that has been added. It says I updated my readme file with Markdown tag. This is the actual comment message that was sent together with the push. Okay, so we can see that the Markdown is actually working. The Markdown we did. Now this is actually displaying as a header. See that it is actually put and it's looking big like an H1. Then you can see there's a nice underlined file here, and then you can see oh it looks like this one did not work as intended, but we can fix that one later. And then you can see the list is still here. In this tutorial I've learned everything. So okay, so that is actually the gist of how to create and send and push a file from the local repository onto our remote repository. So over here you can see that this is actually master and not main. If we changed it to main, it would have been main here. So this is actually the main branch we are using right now. It's called master. Okay, so let's go over what we've done so far. So we created a local repository called wb_git. We created it here. Okay, we created this local repository, and then we went in and then we decided to create a readme file. We made this readme file a markdown file, so we added some markdown tags to it. Okay, so once we're done, we came over to GitHub and then we created a repository. We called this repository wb_git, and then we went over to create a personal access token, which we used to attach we attached this URL, which gave us access to our repository. And then we finally managed to push our work from our local repository onto our remote repository. So this actually gives you the workflow of Git. So we started from creating a repository on a local, and then we finally pushed our repository onto our remote. Now before we close, I just want us to look at the one last command, which is the Git Clone command. Now that we've been actually successful in pushing our work to our remote, we can now clone that remote work. We can now clone that work from the remote to any other place that we want. So let's say we were working on this machine and we've now pushed to a remote, and we want to work on another machine or another server or another laptop or whatever place we want to work. We can actually go and pull this work we have, and then we can work on it and we can push to it. So how do we do that? Let's just take a look at how it's done. So okay, so right back here, where are we? So sorry, let me cd back into this. Okay, so we're inside of our master. We're going to simply do a git. Okay, so basically I don't want to do the git clone here because this is actually my master. So I'm going to go back a bit, cd. Okay, so this actually allows us to go back twice. So it's like clicking on the back arrow key twice, like this. Okay, alright, so if I do an ls here, I can see that there is git over here. So I'm going to actually clone my work from my repository over to this place. So imagine that this is a new place that I'm working and I want to create my new repository over here. All I'm going to use is the git clone command. I'm going to do git clone, and I'm going to put your URL here. Okay, so we're going to go over to GitHub. We're going to click on this inside of our repository, and we're going to copy this particular file from here. That is the URL of our project. We're going to come over here, and then we're going to paste this right here. Okay, so we're going to clone from our remote onto our local server. Okay, so if that works, you can take a look here. You can see that now we have another wb_git here. The original one is here, okay, but then there's another one here because I was actually able to successfully clone the remote copy onto this workspace. And when I open it, it is the same thing here. So let me go over into that and then let's see. I'm gonna do an ls. Okay. Alright, so you can see that it initializes with master. So it's a Git repository. So I'm gonna do an ls. I can see the readme. I'm gonna vi into the readme. Okay. Alright, so this was everything we did in the last project before we pushed it. So as you see, when we cloned it, it's still the same thing. So I'm going to edit this and add one last thing, and then we're going to push Git Clone. So I just learned the Git Clone. So I'm going to add this, and then I'm going to save my work. I'm going to do it Git status because I can. Alright, it's modified. So Git add. Okay. I'm going to do a Git status again. I'm going to do a Git commit. I'm going to put a -m. I'm going to say learned Git Clone. Okay. Now I'm gonna commit this one. Then I'm gonna push this. I think I'm gonna get an error here. Okay, so I'm still getting the same error I got earlier on. Now why is this? It's because I did not clone with my personal access token. Now the access token, like I said, is your access to your GitHub account and your GitHub repository. So you have to make sure that your account or your cloning or your pushing or anything you do that has to do with any transaction with your remote must have the token involved. So we actually did the Git cloning wrong here, so we have to go back and change it. So I'm going to first cd out of this. Okay, and then I'm going to delete this. I'm going to remove. I'm not going to remove. Let me just delete this straight from here. I'm going to delete this. Okay. Alright. So now that this is deleted, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do the Git clone again. Git clone. And then I'm going to pick up my URL from this place. I'm going to pick up my URL. I'm going to bring it here. Paste. And then once I'm here, I'm going to insert my @, and then I'm gonna come here and pick my token. Okay, I'm gonna pick my token again. I'm gonna paste it right here, and then I'm going to hit enter. So now it's not just gonna clone any other repository without permissions. It's gonna clone the repository, and it's gonna tell the repository that, hey, this repository actually has permissions from this particular person that is highlighted in this token. So any push or any new information that is created can be pushed. Okay, so I'm going to just go over what I did here. I'm going to do a cd and ls, and I'm going to cd. As you can see, there is a new folder there, so you know. So I've just cloned this new repository over here. Okay, so I'm just going to vi. I'm doing the same thing I did just earlier on, so I'm gonna do a vi. I'm gonna insert, and then I'm gonna do a git clone. Git clone. Okay, I'm gonna do a git status. Okay, I'm gonna do a git add. Okay, then I'm gonna do a git commit. Then the message is going to be just learned about Git Clone. Okay, just learned about Git Clone. I'm gonna push this here. Then I'm gonna do a git status. And I'm gonna do a git push. So with this, it's gonna push the work to the remote because it now has access by the token. So if we go over to GitHub right now, okay, and then we refresh our repository, we're going to see that Git Clone has been added. So it means that even though I did not initialize this repository, I was able to clone the repository. I was able to add information to the repository. So that is how the Git Clone works. The Git Clone allows you to just clone a work that is already been hosted, and then you can just add to it. So usually this is what will happen. Someone is going to create their project, and then they're going to add you as a collaborator, and then you do your own updates that you want to do, and then you're going to push back to that repository. So this should give you the gist of how all of this works. Okay, so now this video is running a bit long, and I want to end here. Hopefully in the next video I'll touch on how to do the Git branch and the Git merge, and how to work with collaboration and working with others on the same project. But for now, I'd like to end here. If you actually like this video and you've actually learned something from this video, consider subscribing. I really need that, and to know that you actually want to support what I'm doing. Also, like the video and share with your friends. If you like it, you can share with someone else. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you and bye.